An elderly woman vanished without a trace while taking her beloved cats for their evening walk, leaving the entire neighborhood in a state of panic and confusion. Her cats were found wandering alone, but she was nowhere to be seen. But 72 hours later, the neighbor's usually calm dog won't stop barking frantically at an old shed in the backyard. And when authorities finally decide to investigate, what they discover inside makes everyone's blood run cold. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you're watching, because now I'm going to tell you how all of this happened. In the quiet suburb of Mapleton, Connecticut, Margaret Wilkins glanced at the kitchen wall clock as it approached 6:45 in the evening. Her thin fingers smoothed the front of her beige cardigan, a ritual as familiar as the ticking of the clock itself. The pot roast in the oven filled the small colonial home with a comforting aroma, mingling with the scent of freshly baked rolls she'd prepared earlier for her weekly dinner with Elaine. Carrots, potatoes, gravy, Margaret murmured to herself, mentally checking items off her preparation list. Set the table for two, not one. Tuesday is Elaine's night. At 85, Margaret had developed systems to manage her early-stage dementia. Notes on the refrigerator, alarms on her outdated flip phone, and most importantly, rigid adherence to routine. The dinner with her niece every Tuesday at 8 o'clock was sacred, an anchor in her week that kept her moored to the present. Margaret moved to the entryway where Marmalade and Ash waited patiently by the door, their tails swishing in anticipation of their evening constitutional. The orange tabby's emerald eyes followed her movements as she retrieved their harnesses from the hook by the door. "Time for our patrol," she announced to her feline companions, who seemed to understand the ritual's importance. With practiced hands that betrayed only the slightest tremor of age, Margaret secured the harnesses around their bodies, checking each clasp twice. Outside, the October air carried the first real chill of autumn. Margaret descended her porch steps carefully, the cats leading the way with their leashes extending from her steady grip. Across the street, Frank Peterson looked up from tending his front garden, raising a soil-covered glove in greeting. "Beautiful evening, Margaret," he called out, his voice carrying in the quiet neighborhood. "Indeed it is, Frank," she replied, her voice warm despite its slight quaver. "Though I think we might get some rain later. Duke keeping well?" she asked, inquiring after his German shepherd who was undoubtedly napping somewhere in the house. "Lazy as ever," Frank laughed. "Enjoy your walk." Margaret nodded and continued down the sidewalk, unaware that this ordinary exchange would be the last time anyone in Mapleton would see her. At 8:15, Elaine Porter pulled into the driveway of her aunt's house, surprised to see all the lights on, but no sign of Margaret at the window. Typically, her aunt would be watching for her arrival, often opening the door before Elaine could even knock. A school counselor accustomed to noticing subtle warning signs, Elaine felt the first flicker of concern as she approached the unlocked front door. "Aunt Margaret?" she called, stepping into the warm, well-lit house. The dining room table was perfectly set for two, the pot roast centered on a trivet, growing cold. More alarming, Marmalade and Ash were huddled together on the living room sofa, without Margaret. Their leashes, still attached to their harnesses, dragged on the floor behind them. Elaine's heart began to race as she moved quickly through the small house, checking each room. "Aunt Margaret?" she called again, her voice rising. The bathroom was empty, the bedroom undisturbed. Her aunt's cell phone sat on its charger in the kitchen, right where it always was. By 8:45, after calling Margaret's few close friends and finding no answers, Elaine contacted the Mapleton Police Department. Officer James Morales arrived 20 minutes later, his crisp uniform and professional demeanor doing little to calm Elaine's growing panic. "She's very high-functioning," Elaine explained, twisting her hands as the officer took notes. "She takes medication, keeps lists, uses alarms on her phone. She has occasional moments of confusion, but she's never wandered off. And she would never miss our Tuesday dinners. It's sacred to her." As midnight approached, with no sign of Margaret and the weather deteriorating into a steady rain, Officer Morales called for additional help and organized search parties for the morning. Elaine sat at her aunt's kitchen table, staring at the untouched pot roast, the cats pressing anxiously against her legs. While Elaine finally dozed off in Margaret's armchair near dawn, exhaustion temporarily overwhelming her worry, her aunt's forgotten cell phone vibrated quietly on the kitchen counter with a weather alert. 5 days of heavy rain forecast for Mapleton. The phone's screen illuminated briefly, showing the last photo taken by its camera, accidentally captured during Margaret's walk, featuring the corner of a dilapidated structure that few in the community remembered existed. The forgotten cell phone on the kitchen counter illuminated the room with its pale blue glow, the weather alert and mysterious photo remaining unnoticed as morning broke over Mapleton. Elaine jerked awake in her aunt's armchair, momentarily disoriented before the previous night's events came flooding back. Her neck ached from the awkward sleeping position, but that discomfort paled compared to the gnawing worry about Margaret's whereabouts. Rubbing her stiff shoulders, Elaine moved to the kitchen and discovered her aunt's phone still on the charger. She unplugged it, noticing the notification for the weather forecast and swiping to clear it. As she did, the photo gallery opened, revealing the last image taken, a blurry shot that appeared to have been captured accidentally. Squinting at the screen, Elaine could make out what looked like weathered wood and broken glass, partially obscured by foliage. "What is this?" she whispered, zooming in on the image. Something about the dilapidated structure tugged at her memory, but before she could place it, the doorbell rang. The sound triggered a momentary surge of hope. Perhaps Margaret had simply gotten lost and found her way to a neighbor's home. But instead, she opened the door to find Henrietta Mills, Margaret's 78-year-old friend from the garden club. Behind her stood several other neighbors, their faces etched with concern. "We've organized search parties," Henrietta announced, unfolding a detailed map of Mapleton on Margaret's coffee table. "I've divided the neighborhood into sectors. Frank and his group will take the park, the Johnsons will cover downtown, and I thought we could start with the wooded area behind Maple Street." By mid-morning, Elaine found herself at the police station, showing Detective Sarah Collins the strange photo from Margaret's phone. The detective studied the image with narrowed eyes, her practical demeanor a stark contrast to the growing panic Elaine felt. "I'll add this to our investigation file," Collins said, sliding the phone into an evidence bag. "But I should warn you, most elderly individuals with dementia are found within a mile and a half of their homes, usually within the first 24 hours. She handed Elaine a pamphlet about missing persons procedures, but the impersonal statistical information only intensified Elaine's frustration. Back at Margaret's house, while searching for any additional clues, she discovered a drawer in her aunt's desk containing a journal filled with concerning notes. "Tuesday. Got lost coming back from the supermarket. Don't tell Elaine. She'll worry," read one entry from 3 weeks earlier. Elaine's stomach tightened with guilt. She'd had no idea her aunt's condition was progressing so rapidly. Across town, Frank Peterson sat at his computer, methodically reviewing footage from his newly installed security cameras. The system had been primarily intended to document a property line dispute with another neighbor, but now it might hold vital information about Margaret's disappearance. "There," he muttered, leaning closer to the screen. The timestamp showed 7:22 p.m., Margaret's cats trotting back along the sidewalk alone, their leashes dragging behind them, with no sign of their owner. As evening approached, volunteers trudged back to Margaret's house, soaked from the persistent rain and disheartened by their lack of success. The local news van parked outside broadcast a segment showing Margaret's recent photo from the community picnic, describing her as an elderly woman with dementia who had wandered away from home. Detective Collins checked hospital records from her office, confirming that no one matching Margaret's description had been admitted to any medical facility in the region. Meanwhile, Elaine walked Margaret's usual route once more, this time with Marmalade on his leash, hoping the cat might lead her to some clue about his owner's whereabouts. The orange tabby merely stared at her with indifferent green eyes, pulling in random directions, without any apparent purpose or recognition. Back at the house, Collins studied an enlarged map of Mapleton, circling the Simmons property with a red marker after hearing Elaine's description of the structure in the photo. As the first full day of searching came to an end, Frank Peterson arrived at Margaret's door with a grim expression, his laptop open in his hands. "I found something on the recordings," he said urgently. "The cats were pulling Margaret in the opposite direction from the park that night, toward the old Simmons property, the place nobody's visited in years since it was sealed off due to structural problems." The first light of dawn illuminated the three figures standing at the rusted fence line of the Simmons property, their breath visible in the chilly morning air. Detective Collins, Frank Peterson, and Elaine stared at the decaying Victorian mansion, partially visible through the overgrown trees, its once grand silhouette now a haunting reminder of faded elegance. "The structure in Margaret's photo looks like it might be an outbuilding, not the main house," Collins observed, comparing the blurry image on her phone with the property before them, possibly near the back of the grounds. Elaine wrapped her arms around herself, fighting a chill that had nothing to do with the morning temperature. "Can we go in and look?" "That's where things get complicated," Collins replied, already pulling out her phone. "The property's been tied up in probate for years. We need proper authorization before entering." Within minutes, Collins was engaged in a tense conversation with the attorney handling the Simmons estate. Her professional demeanor cracked slightly as frustration mounted. "Entiendo sus preocupaciones sobre responsabilidad civil, pero estamos hablando de una emergencia con riesgo de vida," she said, unconsciously slipping into Spanish, as she often did when agitated. Switching back to English, she continued, "Yes, I understand your liability concerns, but we're talking about a life-or-death emergency." The conversation ended with Collins exhaling sharply. "He insists on a formal warrant, says the property is too dangerous for anyone to enter without proper documentation and liability waivers." Elaine's phone buzzed with a call from Carol Williams, the principal at Mapleton High School where she worked as a counselor. "Elaine, we're all devastated about your aunt." Carol's voice was sympathetic but businesslike. "The students need consistency, though. When can we expect your return?" That afternoon, Margaret's living room had been transformed into an impromptu command center. A detailed map of the Simmons property, printed from county records, was spread across the coffee table. Collins stood before the assembled volunteers, explaining the situation. "The property spans nearly 4 acres, most of it overgrown. The mansion has been vacant since Old Man Simmons died 5 years ago. We'll need the warrant before we can legally enter, but we can still search the perimeter and adjacent public areas." Henrietta Mills, who had been sitting quietly in Margaret's favorite armchair, suddenly stood up. "This is ridiculous," she exclaimed, her thin frame vibrating with indignation. "If she were someone important, the police would have broken through those gates already. Just because she's 85 doesn't mean she matters less." Back at the police station, Collins sat at her desk staring at the legal documents spread before her. Bold stamps declaring urgent and pending seemed to mock her efforts. She massaged her temples, feeling the beginning of a tension headache. The clock on the wall showed nearly 48 hours since Margaret's disappearance. Meanwhile, Elaine sat at her kitchen table surrounded by paperwork for an unpaid leave of absence from her job. She calculated her savings against mortgage payments and bills, knowing with certainty that she couldn't abandon the search for her aunt, regardless of the financial consequences. The local weather forecast played on the television in the background, the meteorologist gesturing to a significant storm system moving over Connecticut. "Flash flood warnings remain in effect throughout Litchfield County," he announced gravely. At Margaret's home, Elaine noticed Ash, the gray tabby, perched on the windowsill, staring fixedly in the direction of the Simmons property. The cat's amber eyes reflected something unknowable, an animal intuition that humans could only guess at. When Collins finally received the warrant late the following day, her triumph quickly evaporated. "We can't execute this until tomorrow," the administrative officer informed her apologetically. "All available personnel are responding to storm-related emergencies. Roads are flooding county-wide." That evening, Elaine drove slowly along the perimeter of the Simmons property, rain lashing against her windshield. Her headlights briefly illuminated something that made her brake suddenly, a gap in the fence at the back of the property, barely visible through the curtain of water. Back home, she stared at the calendar on Margaret's kitchen wall, where someone had circled a stark notation in red. 72 hours, chances significantly reduced after this period. The clock showed that Margaret had now been missing for nearly 4 days. Frustrated with the delays and driven by mounting desperation, Elaine returned to the gap in the fence later that night, equipped with only a weak flashlight and a cell phone whose battery hovered near 15%. She slipped through the opening into the Simmons property, unaware that the intensifying storm was rapidly transforming the grounds into a dangerous, unstable quagmire. The cold rain pelted Elaine's face as she squeezed through the gap in the fence, her thin jacket already soaked through. She paused to film her surroundings with her phone, documenting everything as potential evidence. "I'm entering the Simmons property at approximately 11:15, she whispered into the device, her voice nearly drowned by the drumming of rain. Each step required conscious effort as her boots sank into the saturated ground, the mud creating a suction that threatened to claim her footwear. The mansion loomed in the distance, a dark silhouette against the night sky, occasionally illuminated by flashes of lightning. Elaine directed her flashlight beam along the overgrown path, its weak light barely penetrating the darkness. 20 minutes into her illicit exploration, Elaine's flashlight revealed something that made her heart race: partial footprints in a muddy section of the path. They were small, consistent with an elderly woman's shoe size, and headed deeper into the property. "These could be hers," Elaine whispered, quickly filming the rapidly deteriorating evidence as rainwater filled the depressions. At the police station across town, Detective Collins tried Elaine's cell phone for the third time, growing increasingly concerned when it went straight to voicemail. Glancing at her watch, 11:47, she made a decision. "I'm going to check on Miss Porter," she told the night desk sergeant, grabbing her raincoat. 15 minutes later, Collins stood in Elaine's empty apartment, taking in the scene with practiced eyes. On the kitchen table lay a map of the Simmons property with handwritten markings, including a circled area at the back perimeter with the notation, "Fence Gap." Back on the rain-soaked grounds, Elaine's breath caught as her flashlight beam illuminated a small piece of beige fabric snagged on a thorny bush. With trembling fingers, she carefully extracted it, immediately recognizing the distinctive weave of her aunt's favorite cardigan. She was here, Elaine whispered, renewed determination propelling her forward despite the increasingly treacherous conditions. At the main entrance to the Simmons property, emergency vehicles began arriving, their lights cutting through the downpour. Collins distributed equipment to the hastily assembled rescue team. "We potentially have 2 missing persons now," she informed them grimly. "Our priority is locating both Margaret Wilkins and her niece, Elaine Porter." Meanwhile, across Mapleton and beyond, a different kind of mobilization was occurring. Former students of Margaret, many now middle-aged with families of their own, shared memories and news of her disappearance on social media platforms. Find Margaret Wilkins began trending locally, creating virtual search parties to complement the physical ones. Deeper into the Simmons property, Elaine spotted a structure through the trees, a small garden shed with a partially collapsed roof. Something about it triggered an instinctive certainty. This was the building from her aunt's accidental photo. As she approached, her flashlight began to flicker, its batteries weakened by constant use and the relentless moisture. Behind her, Collins and 2 officers carefully followed the same path, guided by Elaine's fresh footprints and an emergency GPS tracker activated on her phone. "She's heading toward the old shed," Collins observed, recognizing the structure from property records she'd reviewed earlier. Elaine approached the shed cautiously, calling out despite knowing her voice would be swallowed by the storm. "Aunt Margaret, are you here?" The ground around the structure appeared oddly disturbed, with inexplicable depressions that should have raised warning flags in her mind. Suddenly, the earth beneath Elaine's feet gave way with a sickening lurch. A scream tore from her throat as she began to sink, the waterlogged ground collapsing into some hidden void below. Her phone slipped from her grasp, disappearing into the darkness as she desperately clawed at the edges of the crumbling earth. Collins and her officers arrived just in time to witness Elaine's predicament. "Hold on!" one shouted, diving forward to grab her wrists, while his partner illuminated the scene with a powerful flashlight. The beam revealed a frightening sight, a hollow space beneath the shed where the soil had eroded away, creating a deep sinkhole partially filled with muddy water. As Collins helped a shaking Elaine back to safety, the rescue team's powerful light illuminated the interior of the hole, revealing a space like a shallow basement beneath the shed, partially flooded with rainwater, and in the center, almost submerged, an object that made everyone's blood run cold. Margaret's medical alert bracelet gleaming in the mud. The medical alert bracelet glinted beneath the murky water, the engraving, "Margaret Wilkins, Dementia, Contact, Elaine Porter," clearly visible in the powerful beam of the rescue team's flashlight. Dawn broke over the Simmons property, transforming the night's chaos into a structured emergency response. Multiple vehicles with flashing lights lined the muddy access road, while hastily erected tents protected equipment from the persistent rain. "How long until the structural team arrives?" Collins asked into her radio, glancing at Elaine, who sat wrapped in a thermal blanket inside an ambulance, hands trembling around a cup of coffee. 20 minutes, came the crackling response. "Weather's slowing everyone down." An engineer in a hard hat carefully examined the shed's perimeter, keeping a safe distance from the collapsed area. "This structure sits on an old storage basement that doesn't appear on any property plans," he explained to Collins. "The floor has completely given way in this section." Collins immediately placed an emergency call to the county's specialized rescue unit. "We need confined space experts and pumping equipment immediately," she urged. "The water's rising approximately an inch per hour, and we have reason to believe someone may be trapped inside." Dr. Michael Harrison, the emergency physician who had arrived with the ambulance, approached Collins and Elaine with a grave expression. "If she's alive, we're dealing with severe dehydration, hypothermia, possible fractures, and complications from not having taken her dementia medication. The longer the extraction takes, the more critical her condition becomes." Within the hour, Mapleton's community response became evident as residents arrived with generators, water pumps, and powerful flashlights. They formed a human chain, passing equipment hand to hand through the mud toward the site. Frank Peterson organized the volunteers, his face set with determination as he directed people to where they were most needed. Technicians carefully inserted a fiber optic camera through a stabilized opening in the shed floor, all eyes fixed on the monitor, showing the flooded space below. The murky water made visibility nearly impossible, shapes indistinct in the darkness until something colorful flashed briefly on screen. From her position several yards back, Elaine watched the monitor with desperate hope, unconsciously rocking back and forth while whispering, "Please, please, please." Her hands covered her mouth, stifling sobs when the camera operator announced, "We have something. I can't confirm what it is, but there's definitely something person-sized in that corner." Firefighters in specialized rescue gear prepared to enter the space, checking ropes and harnesses while reviewing their approach. "We'll need to stabilize the remaining floor structure before anyone goes in," the team leader insisted. "One wrong move could cause a complete collapse." The medical team organized an impromptu treatment station, arranging IV fluid bags, thermal blankets, and a defibrillator in anticipation of what they might find. Dr. Harrison briefed his nurses on the likely conditions they would face, an elderly patient with multiple critical issues requiring immediate intervention. Henrietta arrived clutching Marmalade's carrier, the orange cat meowing loudly inside. "Animals can sense things we can't," she declared to anyone who would listen. He wouldn't stop crying looking in this direction. After what seemed like an eternity of preparation, the first rescuer disappeared into the opening in the shed floor, carefully descending by rope into the flooded space below. His voice came through the radio, tense but professional. "I'm in. Visibility almost zero, water chest deep." A hushed silence fell over the crowd as they waited for further communication, only the sound of rain and pumping equipment filling the air. Elaine stood perfectly still, her breath held, fingers interlaced in an unconscious prayer. The radio crackled with static before the rescuer's voice broke through with words that made time stand still. "Found her. She's alive. Repeat, Margaret Wilkins is alive, but we need to get her out of here immediately. Found her. She's alive." The words crackled through the radio, electrifying the crowd gathered around the collapsed shed. Within moments, the rescue operation transformed from search to extraction, with every second now precious. The rescuer's voice continued through the radio, tension evident despite his professional tone. "She's unconscious but breathing. I can feel a pulse, weak but present. The water level is rising around her." From inside the flooded space, the beam of the rescuer's waterproof headlamp illuminated Margaret's form, partially submerged in the murky water. Her beige cardigan floated around her like a ghostly halo, her white hair plastered against her pale face. The rescuer carefully positioned himself to support her head above water, while the team above prepared the extraction equipment. "We need to stabilize her spine before moving her," called the team leader from above. "Lower the specialized stretcher. We don't know what injuries she's sustained." The complex extraction operation commenced with methodical precision. 2 additional rescuers descended into the space, bringing specialized equipment designed for confined space rescues. The team worked in near silence, communicating with hand signals and brief commands as they secured Margaret to the stretcher. A tense moment arose when part of the remaining structure groaned ominously, sending a shower of dirt and rotted wood into the water. "Freeze!" ordered the team leader, while engineers above quickly reinforced support beams around the opening. After an agonizing 30 seconds, they received clearance to continue. Margaret was finally brought to the surface, her skin a bluish hue from prolonged cold exposure, her clothes sodden and clinging to her emaciated frame. Despite this, the medical team detected a weak but steady pulse as they immediately wrapped her in thermal blankets and applied oxygen. Elaine surged forward at the sight of her aunt, a sob escaping her throat. "Aunt Margaret!" A paramedic gently blocked her approach. "She's in critical condition, ma'am. We need space to work. You can ride in the ambulance, but please let us stabilize her first." The ambulance departed with sirens wailing, Margaret inside with 2 paramedics, working continually to raise her core temperature. The cardiac monitor showed irregular heartbeats that concerned the medics, who radioed ahead to the emergency department at Mapleton General Hospital. At the hospital, the emergency team was prepared for Margaret's arrival, creating a choreographed transfer from ambulance to trauma room. Dr. Eleanor Reeves, the 50-year-old emergency department director, took command of Margaret's care with calm efficiency. "Get me a core temperature reading, full blood panel, chest X-ray, and start warming protocols immediately," she ordered, as nurses connected Margaret to hospital monitors and physicians assessed her condition. In the waiting room, Dr. Reeves explained the situation to Elaine. "The next 24 hours are critical. She's suffering from profound hypothermia, severe dehydration, a likely hip fracture, and respiratory compromise from water aspiration. Her age and pre-existing condition complicate everything." The monitors in Margaret's room told the story of her precarious state: core temperature dangerously low at 89 degrees Fahrenheit, blood pressure unstable, oxygen saturation compromised. The medical team worked through a series of life-saving interventions: gradual warming to prevent arrhythmias, antibiotics for developing pneumonia, imaging that confirmed a fractured left hip. Outside the hospital, Dr. Reeves addressed the impromptu press conference that had formed. "It's extraordinary that Mrs. Wilkins survived these conditions. The water, while causing hypothermia, paradoxically provided essential hydration. Without it, she would have succumbed to dehydration days ago." Through the night, Elaine maintained her vigil in the uncomfortable chair beside Margaret's ICU bed. Around 3 in the morning, she jerked awake when she felt a slight movement, Margaret's fingers twitching beneath her hand. "Nurse!" Elaine called, and the night nurse hurried in to check vitals. "She's responding to stimuli," the nurse explained with cautious optimism. "Squeeze her hand and watch. She's still in there, fighting to come back." As dawn broke over Mapleton, the hospital became the focal point of community attention. The reception area filled with flowers and cards, residents bringing offerings in celebration of what people were already calling the miracle of Mapleton. In the quiet of the pre-dawn hours, when only Elaine and the night nurse were present in the room, Margaret's eyelids fluttered open for the first time. Her blue eyes, though clouded with confusion, fixed directly on her niece's face, and her cracked lips moved to form two surprising words before slipping back into unconsciousness. The cats knew. The cats knew. Margaret's words lingered in the hospital room as she drifted back into unconsciousness, leaving Elaine bewildered yet hopeful. Over the next week, Margaret's condition stabilized enough to move her from intensive care to a regular room, though her recovery remained precarious. One afternoon, Elaine sat beside her aunt's hospital bed, helping her with a bowl of broth, the first solid food Margaret had been allowed since her rescue. Though frail, some color had returned to the elderly woman's face, and her eyes seemed clearer during her periods of wakefulness. "Can you remember anything else about that night?" Elaine asked gently, setting aside the half-finished bowl. Margaret's brow furrowed with concentration. "We were walking." Marmalade pulled hard, following something, a squirrel perhaps. Her voice was thin but determined. The cats were very excited about something. Later that same day, Margaret looked up at Elaine with sudden confusion, her momentary clarity evaporating. "Robert will be coming to pick me up today, won't he?" she asked, referring to her husband who had passed away 12 years earlier. "Uncle Robert isn't coming today," Elaine responded with practiced gentleness, redirecting her aunt's attention to a photo album she'd brought from home. "Let's look at some pictures instead." In the hallway outside Margaret's room, Dr. Reeves reviewed the medical chart with Elaine, her expression serious. "The physical and psychological trauma has accelerated her dementia symptoms significantly. There will be good days and bad days, moments of complete lucidity followed by profound confusion." The following morning, a geriatric specialist named Dr. Chen showed Elaine options on his tablet: various assisted living facilities, home modification plans, monitoring systems, and their associated costs. "Medicare will cover some expenses, but many of these adaptations will require out-of-pocket payment," he explained gently. That afternoon, Margaret participated in her first physical therapy session. Despite the pain from her healing hip fracture, determination set her jaw as she attempted a few steps with a walker, her thin legs trembling with the effort. Across town, the attorney representing the Simmons property's distant heir met with Detective Collins and municipal authorities. "My client had no knowledge of this underground structure. The original blueprints didn't include it," he insisted, clearly concerned about liability issues. During a rare moment of clarity the next day, Margaret described her ordeal to Detective Collins. "The floor simply disappeared beneath my feet. I fell into darkness. I tried to call out, but no one could hear me." Her voice quavered at the memory. "I remember terrible pain in my hip. I couldn't climb out." 2 days later, Margaret grew frustrated during cognitive testing, tears welling in her eyes when she couldn't recall simple words or complete basic sequencing tasks. "I used to be a teacher," she whispered to the neuropsychologist. "I taught children to read for 40 years. Frank Peterson and Duke brought unexpected joy during their hospital visit later that week. The German shepherd gently rested his head on Margaret's bed, allowing her to stroke his soft fur, bringing a genuine smile to her face for the first time since her rescue. Gazing out her hospital window one evening, Margaret's expression turned distant. "The cats returned home without me," she remarked to Elaine. "They're smart, smarter than people sometimes. They knew the way back." Meanwhile, Elaine spent evenings at Margaret's house, preparing for her eventual return. She installed grab bars in the bathroom, removed throw rugs that could cause tripping, and rearranged furniture to accommodate a walker. Henrietta orchestrated a special visit from Marmalade and Ash, gaining approval from hospital administration after arguing that animal therapy would benefit Margaret's recovery. When the cats were brought into her room in their carriers, Margaret's emotional reaction was profound, silent tears streaming down her face as she stroked their familiar fur. Late one night, after Elaine had gone home to rest, Margaret experienced a moment of crystal clarity. She called the night nurse urgently, requesting paper and pen. "I need to write this down before I forget again," she insisted. With a trembling but determined hand, she began sketching a detailed map of the Simmons property, marking passages and structures that appeared on no official blueprint, revealing knowledge that no one imagined she possessed. Detective Collins arrived at Margaret's hospital room early the next morning, her expression changing from professional detachment to genuine surprise as she examined the detailed map drawn by Margaret's trembling hand. "This level of detail is remarkable," Collins said, comparing the hand-drawn map with official property records on her tablet. "She's identified structures that don't appear on any official blueprints." While Collins studied the map, Elaine discovered a weathered cardboard box pushed to the back of Margaret's bedroom closet at home. Inside, she found yellowed photographs of the Simmons mansion in its heyday, and among them, a black-and-white image that made her gasp. A young Margaret, perhaps 25, wearing a maid's uniform, standing on the mansion's grand staircase. Later that afternoon, during occupational therapy, Margaret demonstrated surprising clarity about her connection to the property. "I worked for the Simmons family for 7 years, from 1955 to 1962, she explained, while practicing buttoning a shirt. "I knew every corner of that house. The family trusted me with everything." Across town, Collins and Elaine hunched over microfiche records in the municipal archives, the mechanical whir of the ancient machine filling the quiet room. "Here it is," Collins said, pointing to a staff list from 1956. Margaret Williams, her maiden name, listed as head housekeeper for the Simmons estate. 2 days later, Margaret sat in a wheelchair at the perimeter of the Simmons property, guiding a small team of investigators from a safe distance. "The basement was originally used to store liquor during Prohibition," she explained, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "After that ended, old Mr. Simmons used it to store garden tools and fishing equipment. That's why the shed was built above it, convenience." Based on Margaret's map, construction technicians inspected other areas of the property, discovering additional hidden structures and safety hazards. "She was right about everything," the lead inspector told Collins. "This place is a maze of undocumented additions and modifications." The following evening, Mapleton's town hall overflowed with concerned citizens. Mayor Richardson addressed the packed room. "The incident with Margaret Wilkins has exposed serious flaws in our protocols for abandoned properties and elder care. Tonight, we begin implementing changes." Within days, volunteers installed emergency alert systems in homes of elderly residents living alone across Mapleton, part of a new initiative dubbed the Margaret Program. Each system connected directly to emergency services and designated family members, ensuring no one would go unnoticed in an emergency. At Margaret's home, Elaine discovered an old diary documenting her aunt's time at the Simmons estate, including entries about a young delivery man named Robert Wilkins who caught her eye. "He brought fresh vegetables every Tuesday," one entry read. "He always has a joke ready, and today he asked if I might like to see a picture show on Saturday." By the 3rd week after her rescue, Margaret's progress allowed her transfer to a less intensive rehabilitation unit. During group activities, she sometimes shared stories about the Simmons family that captivated other patients and staff alike. Her memory of those distant days remarkably intact, even as recent events remained fragmented. A team of civil engineers used Margaret's map to create a comprehensive new survey of the property. "It's extraordinary," the lead engineer told Collins. She remembered details that don't appear in any official record: structural supports, drainage systems, even electrical wiring patterns from the 1950s. The local historical society began recording Margaret's recollections as part of a preservation project, recognizing the unique window she provided into Mapleton's past. Meanwhile, Frank Peterson organized weekend volunteer crews to properly secure the property's perimeter, preventing future accidents. One afternoon, a delivery arrived for Margaret at the Rehabilitation Center, an album filled with photos and cards from former students, many now middle-aged with families of their own. "You taught us more than reading," one card read. "You taught us to notice the world around us." While organizing Margaret's financial documents for upcoming medical expenses, Elaine discovered a yellowed property deed showing that a small parcel of the Simmons land had been legally transferred to Margaret decades earlier, a fact her aunt had apparently forgotten with time. During a visit to the Municipal Records Office to verify this discovery, Elaine and Collins were approached by Harold Jenkins, the elderly archivist, who had worked in the office for over 40 years. After overhearing Margaret's name, he disappeared into the records room, returning with a yellowed envelope sealed with the words, "To be opened only in the event of my death, Helen Simmons, 1985," revealing that the last owner of the mansion had left something specifically for Margaret, a secret kept for almost 4 decades. The yellowed envelope trembled in Harold Jenkins' age-spotted hands as he presented it to Elaine and Detective Collins. "This has been waiting in our secure archives for decades," the elderly archivist explained. "Helen Simmons left explicit instructions that it should remain sealed unless Margaret Wilkins inquired about it or, well, in the event of Helen's death." 3 days later, Elaine, Collins, and the municipal attorney gathered in a wood-paneled conference room at the town hall. With careful movements, Collins slid a letter opener beneath the envelope's seal, which surrendered with a soft tearing sound. The papers inside were yellowed, but the handwriting remained clear, elegant cursive flowing across the pages. "My dearest Margaret," Collins read aloud, "if you are reading this, I have already departed. Few understood our friendship, but you were the sister I never had." Her voice trailed off as she skimmed the contents, her professional demeanor momentarily shaken by what she found. At the Rehabilitation Center the following morning, Margaret sat in her therapy session, a photo album open on her lap. When the therapist showed her a photograph of Helen Simmons, Margaret's eyes brightened with recognition. "Helen and I shared a love for books," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "She encouraged me to become a teacher when no one believed I could. A woman of her standing supporting a housekeeper's ambitions. It was unheard of then." Across town, a legal expert examined the alternative will found in the envelope. "This document was never officially registered, but it's properly signed and witnessed," he explained to Elaine. "It explicitly states that the small house on Maple Street, your aunt's current home, was a gift from Helen Simmons, not a purchase as everyone believed. This complicates the legal situation considerably." At Margaret's house, Elaine supervised contractors installing the final modifications for her aunt's return: wheelchair ramps at entrances, fall alarms in strategic locations, and a discreet monitoring system connected to Elaine's phone. Each addition represented both physical support and an acknowledgement that Margaret's independence would never quite be the same. Later that week, James Simmons, a 40-year-old distant nephew of the Simmons family, arrived in Mapleton. Dressed in an expensive suit that seemed out of place in the small town, he walked the perimeter of the property with his attorney, his expression sour. "I don't care about the sentimental history," he was overheard saying. "That old woman has no legal right to any part of this." The community's response to Margaret's impending return home manifested in a calendar posted at the town library, with volunteers signing up for daily shifts to assist with meals, transportation to medical appointments, and companionship. The once empty grid now overflowed with names, some scheduling themselves months in advance. At the Rehabilitation Center, Margaret packed her meager belongings with determined movements, despite her still healing hip. "I want my cats," she stated firmly to the discharge nurse. "I want my house. I've spent enough time in institutions." An informal hearing in Mayor Richardson's office brought together city representatives, attorneys, James Simmons, Elaine, and Detective Collins. The tension in the room was palpable as they discussed the implications of Helen's newly discovered will. James maintained that the document couldn't supersede the officially filed estate papers, while the city attorney argued for Margaret's moral, if not fully established legal, right to her home. During the meeting, Elaine shared a photograph she'd found, a faded image showing young Margaret and Helen sitting in the mansion's garden, laughing together, their postures suggesting an ease and equality rare for that time between employer and employee. Throughout Mapleton, preparations for Margaret's homecoming transformed her modest house. Former students hung welcome banners, neighbors arranged flowers from their gardens in vases throughout the rooms, and children created colorful cards for the teacher who had taught many of their parents decades ago. On the morning Margaret was scheduled to return home, James Simmons appeared unexpectedly at Elaine's apartment. His expression surprisingly softened. In his hands, he held an ornate wooden box. "I found this in my great-uncle's safe," he said quietly. "It contains letters, photographs, and a journal that mentions your aunt repeatedly. I think I've discovered why Helen Simmons really wanted Margaret to have that house, and why my family has tried to keep it secret for so long." James Simmons placed the ornate wooden box on Elaine's kitchen table, his demeanor transformed from corporate hostility to something approaching humility. "I think you should open this before Margaret comes home," he said quietly. Inside the box, Elaine discovered a collection of meticulously preserved photographs, coded letters, and a leather-bound journal disguised as an accounting ledger. One photograph from 1967 showed Margaret with a small child and a woman wearing dark glasses that couldn't fully conceal a prominent bruise on her cheekbone. They stood beside a train, while Helen Simmons watched from a discreet distance. The ambulance arrived at Margaret's house later that morning without emergency sirens, merely providing a planned transport from the rehabilitation center. Neighbors lined the sidewalk, applauding as Margaret was helped from the vehicle, her steps slow but determined with her walker. On the porch, she paused to absorb the moment, breathing deeply before crossing the threshold into her home. Marmalade and Ash immediately rushed to greet her, weaving around the walker's legs with joyful meows. In the kitchen, Elaine and James carefully examined the documents, while Margaret rested in her favorite chair. "These aren't just letters," Elaine whispered, tracing her finger along coded columns of names and dates. "This is a record. They were helping women escape." Margaret recognized the journal immediately when James brought it to her. "Helen and I thought this work had died with us," she said, her voice wavering but clear. "Some things were too dangerous to record officially. Women trapped in situations with powerful men who would never let them go. We created new paths for them. My great-uncle knew about this work," James explained to Elaine. "He kept these documents hidden to protect everyone involved, including Margaret. The house was given to her not just out of friendship, but as a safe station in their underground network." 2 days later, Mapleton residents gathered in Margaret's garden for an impromptu ceremony. Mayor Richardson stood before the assembled crowd, announcing the creation of the Wilkins Simmons Foundation to continue the legacy of supporting abuse victims. Margaret sat beneath her blooming hydrangeas, tears shimmering in her eyes as the community embraced a mission she had carried out in secret for decades. At the police station, Detective Collins reviewed old missing persons files with new understanding, cases that had puzzled investigators for years, women who simply vanished without explanation, now appeared in a different light. Margaret and Helen's network had operated beneath the surface of Mapleton's placid exterior, saving lives while leaving almost no trace. Margaret adapted gradually to her new routine, accepting the discreet monitoring systems and regular caregiver visits with surprising grace. Elaine demonstrated the emergency alert system, more sophisticated than the medical bracelet that had saved Margaret's life. "Just press this button, and I'll know immediately if you need help," she explained. The cats tested and approved the new ramps installed throughout the house, prompting genuine laughter from Margaret for the first time since her ordeal. "They always did appreciate home improvements," she remarked, watching Marmalade slide down a ramp with apparent delight. On the Simmons property, James and a team of architects walked the grounds, planning the transformation of part of the estate into a community-safe center for women at risk. My family's legacy was hidden for too long, James told the local newspaper. It's time to bring it into the light. One afternoon, Margaret received an unexpected visitor, an elderly woman who introduced herself as Catherine Reynolds from Bridgeport. "You won't remember me," she said softly, "but in 1972, you and Helen helped me and my daughter start a new life away from my abusive husband. I never forgot. And when I saw your story on the news..." As spring fully established itself in Mapleton, Elaine announced her decision to remain permanently, accepting a counseling position at the local school and continuing her aunt's community legacy. Margaret's first post-accident walk was scheduled for that evening, a short, carefully planned route with Frank and Duke, Elaine, and several others gathered on the porch while the cats waited expectantly in their harnesses. As the sun began to set over Mapleton, Margaret Wilkins took her first step beyond the porch, supported by her walker, the cats faithfully by her side, but now surrounded by a vigilant community that had learned its lesson. And as she looked toward the old Simmons property where she had nearly lost her life, she saw not a mansion in ruins, but the beginning foundations of the new community center emerging from the ground, a symbol of how sometimes something must break completely before it can be rebuilt into something even stronger and more meaningful.